You might not know the name Matthew Vaughn, but you know this scene, or maybe this scene. You might not know him, but you do know the stuff he's made, even if some of it is truly painful.
Good evening.
Matthew Vaughn is one of the most successful directors in Hollywood that no one talks about. On the surface, he seems like a journeyman director that settled down for a franchise, but no. This was an auteur who had something to prove that time after time tried to defy the studio system until eventually he was trapped into a franchise he helped create. This is a director who had glory days of making insane movies of Nicolas Cage beating up kids and Daniel Craig slinging old booger sugar. And that's what's so fascinating. How did this really interesting auteur end up becoming the yes man for 20th Century Fox? And this is how. Now, in order to see how we ended up at Argyle, we need to go back, way back. We gotta go back to the most important year of all time, 2004. In 2004, Matthew Vaughn, the descendant of King George VI, breaks out with a directorial debut called Layer Cake, an adaptation of a book about Daniel Craig selling cocaine to Dumbledore, and then after that movie, every 3 years from 2004 to 2010, Matthew Vaughn had a new film in a completely different genre, and all of them are completely unique. Layer Cake is a low-key thriller that is so grungily shot, but very well for its budget, and it's the reason Daniel Craig ended up getting to be James Bond. It's short and sweet and has a ton of style for a directorial debut and an awful ending. Gotta be one of my favorite genders. Then he goes on to make Stardust, a 2007 swashbuckling fantasy with Charlie Cox dating Rosalina. It's not amazing, but it feels like the best movie ever while you're watching it. And it is completely different from what Matthew Vaughn did with Layer Cake. Like, look at what Robert De Niro's doing. Scorsese couldn't have gotten a performance like this out of him. And it's so different that you gotta love it. And how do you follow up a huge swashbuckling film like Stardust? You make a brutal deconstruction of superhero films 10 years before people were actually sick of them. Now, this is not the first time Matthew Vaughn has adapted a comic book. He did it with Stardust, which was written by Neil Gaiman, but Kick-Ass is important because this is the first time we meet Mark Millar, and you're going to want to remember that name. Matthew Vaughn decides to adapt his comic book, and this is the most work-for-hire Matthew Vaughn we ever see in his entire career. He admitted he only did this movie for the money, and still, Kick-Ass is extremely good. Even under studio pressure, Matthew Vaughn gets down and creates a film that is completely unique and hilarious. He uses his low budget to create a feel of tangible superheroes and hilarious satire of those heroes. Nicolas Cage, especially in this movie, is a genuine star. The character work here is so great, and the reason you can tell it is so good is because everyone involved understood how superheroes tick, and that was something Hollywood was starting to realize was a trait that a lot of superhero directors didn't tend to have. Zack Snyder, 2 years before, had tried to deconstruct the superhero genre with maybe the greatest comic book of all time when he tried to adapt Watchmen. Yet Matthew Vaughn deconstructs the entire genre way better in less than 2 hours and with a fourth of Watchmen's budget. Through all of his adversities, Vaughn was creating films that were completely unique, and he was playing the cards he was dealt expertly. In 7 years, he had created 3 films, all in different genres, all completely unique, and all extremely good. And there was one franchise looking for a director to turn its entire franchise around. A superhero series quickly realizing how outdated it was becoming, looking for someone to resuscitate the franchise, and Matthew Vaughn was their guy. So when Matthew Vaughn signed on, he got the biggest budget, but he also got the most studio interference he'd encountered so far in his career. Yet with all that adversity, he made the best film of his entire career, and the best X-Men movie ever. X-Men First Class is where everything ends up coming together for old Matty. He finally gets the budget to go along with his unique stylistic approach to reinvent some of the best Marvel characters. Just like with Kick-Ass, he brings these heroes down to earth and makes these Marvel juggernauts relatable. Magneto, before in these movies, is an insane man who wants to build bridges. Here he's an incredibly layered and nuanced character. Charles is way more dynamic, along with having a friendship with Magneto that is heartbreaking to see fall apart. Mystique, Havoc, Banshee, Beast, all of these characters have depth, and none of the character building takes away from the amazing stylistic filmmaking. And it creates not only one of the most fun Marvel movies, but without a doubt, the best Matthew Vaughn film and the best X-Men movie ever. Yet all of that came at the cost that we will see not go away for the rest of Matthew Vaughn's career, and that is the studio pressure. Matthew Vaughn was constantly butting heads. He even tried to get a sequel off the ground, but honestly, he was just sick of it, and this is where he called it quits with the franchise. He decided that it was time for him to call his own shots, and he was going to adapt a comic book that would fit to his own strengths. He cashed out of the X-Men franchise with all his chips and bet them on his own franchise, betting completely on himself. He called old Kick-Ass writer Mark Millar for something to adapt that he can make completely his own. An independent comic he could make his own thing, and it turned out to be Kingsman: The Secret Service. Kingsman: The Secret Service is a great film. It remixes the best parts of the spy genre with extremely fun characters and performances by Colin Firth, Samuel L. Jackson, and Taron Egerton. It's so dynamic and fun and has one of the best action scenes ever put to film. It's just a great one and done film, but Matthew Vaughn Vaughn, in order to get this great film made, accidentally activated the 20th Century Fox monkey paw. He made a franchise so successful he gets to make his first sequel in his entire career with Kingsman: The Golden Circle. And so far, he's been able to be pretty creative and have a lot of control in his films, but here, that's not the case. The studio interference is devastating and he gets crushed by it. The movie is an absolute mess and is truly the first bad film Matthew Vaughn makes. It has a character magically come back from the dead, and it has horrendous cameos and a story that makes absolutely no sense. And after that disaster, he tries to recuperate and make a brand new film that's completely different. He tries to make a World War I spy movie, which is a good idea to depart from what he's done before, but in order for it to get greenlit, it needs to be a Kingsman prequel, and the Kingsman ends up being truly awful. And it's a pretty sad film to watch. You can see the film trying to be a creative World War I film, but it's shackled by all the Kingsman prequel world building they have to do, and it's just terrible. The Kingsman world is really not that interesting, and it makes it such a boring and shallow film. It has a horrible depiction of Rasputin, one of the worst post-credit scenes, and a film that has no characters, and a point in Matthew Vaughn's career where it feels like he's lost his entire identity. The closest comparison I can make career-wise for Matthew Vaughn's The Kingsman is when Michael Bay made Transformers 5. Both were creative directors who were in franchises just for way too long and they got tired and tried to force their own original creative projects into a franchise where it just doesn't work. And that monkey paw of that first original creative film came with this being a franchise where Matthew Vaughn slowly lost control once again. And that's how we go from this 3-film run to this 3-film run. So let's talk about Argyle and what it means for his future. But one sec, let me go watch it real quick. Holy crap, it's so much worse than I thought it would be. Argyle, though, funnily enough, I think is the piece to this whole puzzle. It's apparently a new franchise in a genre that Matthew Vaughn is very comfortable in, yet it resorts to being lazy in all of its action with an incoherent plot and surfing off the goodwill you have for these actors, instead of creating something special and unique. And spoilers for this film, but he also made this a Kingsman spin-off film as well. He couldn't even escape that franchise even when he made Argyle. This is truly an awful film and shows the main piece of why Matthew Vaughn's success crushed his creativity, and that is, he just doesn't have to try anymore. Matthew Vaughn is in his 50s now, and probably if he used his money right, he wouldn't have to work a day in his life. That scrappy director needing to prove himself every time because rent was due on every project died after the success of Kingsman. He just never had to prove himself after that movie was such a success. He just doesn't have his innovative approach to action filmmaking and directing anymore. And the films he makes now are the generic blockbusters that young filmmakers are trying to subvert, like Matthew was doing 20 years ago. He once had to approach every film with a new idea and vision, and now it's just another job for hire. His success has allowed him to be more lazy and become the director he initially was trying to subvert. And in a very sad way, you could say his entire career has come full circle. Man, kind of a bummer to end on, but maybe he has some good movies on the horizon. We can always hope he takes a large creative swing into this next project, but man, right now the future looks bleak. But for whatever reason, I'll always check out what Matthew Vaughn is making. But if he does make Argyle 2 instead of a new unique film about a Nicolas Cage myself in front of the 20th Century Fox studio, I can't take it anymore.